The rain hammered against the cobblestones outside Buckingham Palace. Inside the grand halls, a single sound echoed louder than it should have. The clatter of metal hitting marble floor. A weapon dropped. Every head in the room turned toward the man in red uniform. Captain James Harrington stood at attention moments ago. Now his rifle lay at his feet. His hands were empty. His face was pale, and his eyes were locked on King Charles. The room went silent. Guards don't drop their weapons. Not ever. Not in 40 years of royal tradition. Not in front of the king himself. Security moved forward, but Charles raised his hand. Wait. James had served the crown for 23 years. He stood guard through storms and protests, through celebrations and funerals. He never flinched, never faltered, until today. Before we continue, if you love stories that touch the heart and reveal the truth behind closed doors, subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what happens next. The king took a step closer. Captain Harrington. James didn't move. His jaw was tight. His eyes were wet, but he didn't blink. Your Majesty, James said quietly. His voice cracked on the second word. Something was wrong. Everyone could feel it. The air in the throne room felt heavy. Like a storm about to break, Charles studied the man before him. He had seen James 1,000 times. Always steady, always silent. The perfect soldier. But today, something inside him had shattered. "Speak!" the king said softly. James opened his mouth, then closed it. His hands trembled at his sides. Whatever he was holding inside was too big, too painful. It was breaking him from the inside out. A royal advisor whispered urgently to the king. Protocol demanded James be removed, questioned, possibly arrested. You don't drop your weapon in the presence of royalty. You don't break formation. You don't show weakness. But Charles didn't move. James, he said again. Not Captain. Just his name. That one word did it. The dam broke. I can't do this anymore, James whispered. His voice barely carried across the room. I can't stand here and pretend. Pretend what? The question hung in the air. No one dared to speak. James looked down at the rifle on the floor. I've stood guard for 23 years. I've protected this family with my life. I would have died for any of you without question. He lifted his eyes back to the king. Tears rolled down his face now. He didn't wipe them away. But I can't protect you from the truth anymore. Not when it's killing me. Not when it's the one thing you need to hear. Charles felt his chest tighten. Around them, the guards stood frozen. The advisors held their breath. This wasn't just a breakdown. This was something else. Something deeper. What truth? Charles asked. James swallowed hard. His next words would change everything. He knew it. The king knew it. Everyone in that room knew it. But before James could answer, a door opened behind them. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Quick. Urgent. A young woman appeared in the doorway. She was soaked from the rain. Her eyes found James immediately. Oh, James breathed. Emily, you shouldn't be here. She was already walking toward him, and in her hands. She carried an envelope, old, worn, sealed with wax that bore the royal crest. The king's face went white. He recognized that seal. It was from decades ago, from a time he thought was buried forever. Asterisk Emily. Stopped 3 feet from the king. Water dripped from her coat onto the pristine floor. Her hands shook as she held the envelope. My father was going to stay silent, she said. Her voice was stronger than James expected. He was going to take this to his grave. But I couldn't let him. James closed his eyes. Emily, please. No, Dad. She turned to face him. You've carried this alone for too long. It's destroying you. The king looked between them, father and daughter, both in pain, both holding on to something that was tearing them apart. What is this about? Charles asked. His voice was gentle but firm. He needed to understand. Emily held out the envelope. This was given to my father 30 years ago. By your mother? Queen Elizabeth herself. The room seemed to tilt. Charles felt the weight of every eye on him. His mother had been gone for years now, but her presence filled the space between them like a ghost. She made him promise never to open it, Emily continued, never to speak of it. She said it would protect the family, protect the crown. James finally spoke. His voice was rough with emotion. She told me it was my duty, that some secrets must be kept for the good of the nation. He looked at his daughter. Pride and sorrow mixed on his face, but Emily found it last month. After her mother passed, she was going through my things and she found it hidden in my study. Emily's eyes were bright with tears. Mom died thinking you had an affair. She died believing you kept secrets because you didn't love her enough to tell the truth. James flinched like he'd been struck. I know, Dad. Emily's voice broke. I know now, because I opened it. Charles stepped forward. His hand reached out slowly. May I? Emily handed him the envelope. The wax seal was broken. The letter inside was written in his mother's handwriting. He would recognize it anywhere. His hands trembled as he unfolded the paper. The first line made his breath catch. My dearest Charles, if you are reading this, then the truth has finally come to light, and I am deeply sorry. Charles read in silence. With each line, his face grew paler. His breath came shorter. Around him, no one moved. No one spoke. When he finished, he looked up at James, really looked at him, like he was seeing him for the first time. How long have you known? Charles asked quietly. 30 years, James said. Since the day she gave me that letter, you never said anything? Never told anyone? She asked me not to. She said it would destroy everything you had built, everything you were meant to become. James's voice cracked. She said it was my duty to protect you, even from the truth. Charles folded the letter carefully. His hands were steady now, but his eyes were filled with something deeper than sadness. Understanding, perhaps? Or regret? What does it say? An advisor finally dared to ask. Charles looked at the man, then at the guards, at the staff who had gathered in doorways, at his family, who had appeared at the sound of commotion. Says Charles began slowly, that 30 years ago, there was an incident, an attempt on my life that was covered up, classified, erased from all records. He turned back to James. You weren't just my guard that night. You were the reason I survived. James nodded once, stiff, military. The letter explains that you took a bullet meant for me, that you killed a man in my defense, and that my mother made the decision to erase all evidence of the attack to prevent panic, to prevent questions about security, to prevent the truth from undermining public faith in the monarchy. The room erupted in whispers. Charles held up his hand. She also made you sign documents. Non-disclosure agreements. Confidentiality clauses. She bound you to silence with legal chains and royal command. James said simply. And when your wife asked why you had nightmares, why you couldn't speak about that night, why you were different after, I couldn't tell her. James's voice broke completely now. I couldn't tell the woman I loved why I woke up screaming, why I couldn't hold my own daughter without shaking, why I saw blood on my hands that no one else could see. Emily moved to her father's side. She took his hand. He thought he was having an affair, Emily said to the king. She thought the secrets meant betrayal. She spent 20 years believing her husband didn't love her, and he couldn't tell her the truth. Because of a promise to your mother, Charles felt something break inside his chest. The cost of secrets. The price of duty. His mother had meant to protect him, but in doing so, she had destroyed the man who saved his life. Your wife, Charles said quietly. When did she pass? 6 months ago, James whispered. Without ever knowing the truth? The king closed his eyes. When he opened them again, everyone in the room saw something they had never seen before. The monarch was crying. I am so sorry, Charles said. The words came from somewhere deep, somewhere raw. James, I had no idea. I never knew. James stood straighter. Old habits. You weren't supposed to know, Your Majesty. That was the point. Don't do that. Charles shook his head. Don't hide behind protocol now. Not after this. The king moved closer, Close enough that protocol would call it inappropriate. Close enough that everyone watching held their breath. You saved my life. And it cost you everything. It was my duty, James said automatically. No. Charles's voice was firm. Your duty was to stand guard, to follow orders. What you did that night went far beyond duty. He looked down at the letter in his hands. My mother writes here that you didn't hesitate, that when the gun was pointed at me, you stepped in front. You took the shot. And then, when he tried to fire again, you stopped him. I killed him, James said flatly. I took a life. You saved mine. It doesn't balance out. James's face was carved from stone. You don't kill a man and walk away unchanged. You don't watch the light leave someone's eyes and ever feel clean again. Emily squeezed her father's hand. Dad, I see him every night, James continued. His voice was hollow now, empty. Every night for 30 years. I see his face. I hear the shot. I feel his blood on my hands. You've carried this alone, Charles said softly. For 3 decades. I gave my word. To your mother. To the crown, and it destroyed your marriage. Your peace. Your life. James didn't argue. He couldn't. It was the truth. Charles turned to his advisors. Clear the room. Everyone except immediate family and Captain Harrington and his daughter. There was hesitation. Protests started to form, but the king's face left no room for argument. Slowly, the guards and staff filtered out. Doors closed, until only a handful remained. Sit, Charles said to James. It wasn't a request. James looked uncomfortable. Your Majesty, I'm on duty. You dropped your weapon, remember? You're not on duty. Charles gestured to a chair. Sit, please. James sat. Emily stood beside him. Her hand never left his shoulder. Charles pulled up a chair across from them. Not a throne. Just a chair. He sat eye level with the man who saved his life. Tell me about that night, Charles said. Tell me everything. Sir, the letter. I want to hear it from you. In your words, not my mother's version. Not the official story that never existed, yours. James was quiet for a long moment. Then he began. It was July 15th. 30 years ago. You were visiting a hospital, opening a new children's wing. I was part of your security detail. His voice fell into a rhythm, like he was reading from a script he'd memorized. But this script was written in scars. We were told the area was secure. Background checks on everyone. Locked down tight. But someone slipped through. A man with a history of mental illness. He blamed the monarchy for his problems. His family's problems. He thought if he removed you, things would change. Charles listened. Silent. He got close. Too close. He was in the crowd. Looked like every other well-wisher. Except his hand was in his coat. And I saw his eyes. James's hand moved unconsciously to his chest. To a place beneath his uniform where a scar still marked his skin. I saw his eyes and I knew. You just know. I had maybe 2 seconds to decide. Let protocol handle it and risk being too late. Or act. You acted, Charles said. I stepped in front of you. The gun came out. Fired. I felt the impact. Like being kicked by a horse. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. But training takes over. His voice got quieter, harder. Had my weapon drawn before I even registered the pain. He was lining up a second shot. At your head this time. So I fired. Emily's hand tightened on her father's shoulder. She'd heard this story once. From the letter. But hearing him say it out loud was different. Harder. 1 shot. Center mass. He went down. You were rushed away. I collapsed. Woke up in a hospital 2 days later. And my mother was there, Charles said. She was there. With lawyers. With documents. With a story about how I had a heart episode during duty. How the bullet wound was a training accident from weeks before. How nothing happened that day at the hospital. James looked directly at the king. She told me it was necessary. That if word got out about an assassination attempt, it would cause panic. Copycats. Inspire more attacks. She said the best way to protect you was to make sure it never happened. So you agreed. She gave me a choice. James's laugh was bitter. Sign the papers and stay on your security detail. Refuse and face charges for excessive force. For killing a man without proper cause. For acting outside protocol. Charles felt anger rise in his chest. Not at James. At the impossible position he'd been put in. And your wife never knew. How could I tell her? I was bound by law, by duty, by fear of what would happen if I spoke, so I kept it inside. The nightmares, the guilt, the face of a dead man. I kept it all locked away, Melly spoke up, until it poisoned everything. Until Mom thought the worst. Until she died thinking she was never enough for him. Ow. James closed his eyes. A tear slipped down his cheek. I would have told her if I could. I would have explained everything. But I gave my word. Your word to a dead queen, Emily said gently. To a promise that destroyed your life. Charles stood. He walked to the window. Rain still poured outside. The sky was dark, even though it was midday. My mother did what she thought was right, he said finally. She protected the monarchy. She protected me. But she didn't protect you, James, and that was wrong. Charles turned from the window. His face was set with determination. Emily, you opened the letter? Why bring it here? Why now? Emily straightened. Because my father was dying, Your Majesty. James's head snapped toward her. Emily, not physically, she said quickly. But inside? Every day I watched him fade a little more. The nightmares got worse after Mom died. The guilt. The shame of never telling her the truth. He was drowning, and I couldn't reach him. She looked at the king with fierce eyes. So yes, I broke his promise. I opened the letter. I read what your mother wrote. And I realized my father has been in prison for 30 years. A prison made of silence and duty and secrets. So you came to free him, Charles said. I came to give him back his voice, even if it costs him everything. James stood abruptly. You shouldn't have done this. The consequences are mine to face, Emily interrupted. I'm the one who broke the seal. I'm the one who brought it here. You're innocent. I dropped my weapon. I broke protocol. Because you were breaking apart. Emily's voice cracked. Dad, I've watched you suffer my whole life. I've seen you flinch at loud noises. I've heard you cry out in sleep. I've watched you stare at your hands like they're covered in blood only you can see. She turned back to Charles. He needs help. Professional help. Therapy. Treatment for trauma. But he couldn't get it because he couldn't explain why. He couldn't tell anyone what happened because of a piece of paper and a dead woman's command. The room was silent except for the rain against windows. Charles walked back too. James, you've been carrying this for 30 years alone. I had my duty. Duty shouldn't destroy a man. Charles's voice was rough. I've been king long enough to know that. Duty without compassion is just cruelty in a uniform. He looked at the letter again. Really read it this time. His mother's words. Her reasoning. Her regret hidden in formal language. She knew, Charles said quietly. At the end, she knew what this cost you. That's why she wrote this letter. That's why she left instructions for it to be found. James frowned. What instructions? Charles showed him a section near the bottom. She states here that after her death, your confidentiality agreement would be void, that you would be free to speak, that you should be compensated and honored for your service. I never received anything. Because the letter was sealed, hidden, meant to be discovered, but not immediately. Charles looked at Emily with new respect. Your daughter finding it wasn't an accident. It was time. He walked to his desk, pressed a button. An advisor appeared. I need the royal physician, mental health specialist, best trauma therapist in England. I need them here within the hour. Your Majesty, now. Charles's tone left no room for questions. The advisor disappeared. Charles turned back to James. You will receive the help you need. Full medical treatment. Therapy. Whatever it takes to heal what 30 years of silence has broken. Charles's voice was firm but kind. This is not a request. This is an order. From your king. James's jaw worked. Pride and relief warred on his face. Furthermore, Charles continued, you will be given full pension, honorary discharge with highest honors, and a formal apology from the crown for what was done to you, Your Majesty the optics. I don't care about optics. House's voice rose. A man saved my life and lost his own in the process. His wife died thinking he didn't love her. He spent 3 decades in psychological torment. And you're worried about optics? The advisor went pale. No, sir. Of course not. Then make it happen. Draft the papers. Prepare the statements. I want this resolved today. Charles looked at Emily. Your mother. What was her name? Sarah, Emily said softly. Sarah Harrington. A woman who deserved the truth and never got it. He paused. Would you allow us to honor her? Publicly acknowledge her sacrifice as well? Emily's eyes filled with tears. She would have liked that. Charles nodded. Then we will. A memorial. A recognition that she too paid the price for that night. She lived with the mystery, the doubt, the unanswered questions. That's a different kind of courage. James made a sound. Almost a sob. She was so angry with me. In the end, she thought I didn't trust her. Didn't love her enough to be honest. She was wrong, Emily said firmly. She just didn't know the whole story, and now she never will. But I know, Emily said, and I'll make sure everyone knows, that you loved her. That you would have told her if you could. That you were a hero, Dad. Not a liar. James broke then, completely. He pulled his daughter into his arms and wept, great shaking sobs that came from somewhere deep. 30 years of pain. 30 years of silence. 30 years of carrying death and duty and impossible choices. Charles looked away, giving them privacy. But his own eyes were wet. An aide entered quietly. Your Majesty, the press has gotten word that something is happening. They're gathering outside. Charles wiped his face. Then we'll tell them the truth. All of it, sir. The palace has always maintained a lie, Charles interrupted. My mother did what she thought was right, but continuing that lie now would be wrong. Captain Harrington deserves better. His wife deserves better. The truth deserves better. He walked to James, placed a hand on his shoulder. Are you willing to have this made public? Your service. The attack. The cover-up? All of it? James pulled back from Emily, wiped his eyes. Will it damage the crown? Probably, Charles said honestly. But that's not your concern. You've protected me long enough. Let me protect you now. James searched the king's face, looking for doubt, finding only resolve. Then yes, he said finally. Tell them everything. Charles nodded. We'll do this together. You and me. We'll face them together, Your Majesty Charles, the king said quietly. After everything, I think you've earned the right to use my name. Asterisk. 2 hours later, they stood together on the palace steps. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still heavy. Cameras flashed like lightning. Reporters shouted questions that overlapped into noise. Charles raised his hand. Silence fell gradually, reluctantly. 30 years ago, Charles began, his voice carrying across the crowd. A man tried to kill me. He very nearly succeeded. If not for the courage and quick action of one man, I would not be standing here today. The reporters erupted. Charles waited for quiet. That man is Captain James Harrington. He has served the crown with distinction for over 2 decades. But what you don't know, what no one has known until when? Today's that he saved my life at tremendous personal cost. James stood beside him, straight-backed, uniform, perfect except for the empty holster at his side. His weapon was still inside, still lying on the marble floor where he dropped it. My mother, Queen Elizabeth, made a decision that day. She believed that publicizing the assassination attempt would cause panic, would inspire further attacks, would undermine faith and security and the monarchy itself. Charles paused, choosing his words carefully. She was trying to protect me, to protect the institution. But in doing so, she bound Captain Harrington to silence, legal silence. He couldn't speak of what happened, couldn't explain his actions, couldn't tell even his own wife why he was changed. Emily stood on James's other side, holding her father's hand, anchoring him. Today I learned that this silence destroyed his marriage, caused untold psychological suffering, turned a hero into a prisoner of his own mind. Charles's voice grew stronger. This was wrong. The secrecy was wrong. The burden placed on this man was wrong. And I, as king, am here to acknowledge that wrong and make it right. He turned to James. Captain Harrington, on behalf of the crown, on behalf of my family, on behalf of my mother who is no longer here to speak for herself, apologize. James's eyes widened. Kings don't apologize. Not publicly. Not like this. You saved my life. You carried an impossible secret. You suffered in silence for 3 decades, and you did it all because you believed it was your duty. But duty should never cost a man his soul. Charles reached into his jacket, pulled out a medal. Old, significant, the Victoria Cross, the highest honor for valor. This was my mother's. She wore it often, kept it close. He held it up for the cameras, for the world to see. She left instructions, in a letter, that if the truth ever came out, you were to receive this. Her personal recognition of your courage. He stepped closer to James. You've worn the uniform with honor. You've stood guard without complaint. You've protected my life at the cost of your own peace. It's time the world knew. Charles pinned the medal to James's uniform. The cameras went wild. Flashes, clicks, the moment captured from every angle. But James wasn't looking at the cameras. He was looking at the king, at the man he'd saved, at the recognition he never asked for but desperately needed. Thank you, James, whispered, so quiet only Charles could hear. Thank you for giving me my voice back. Charles gripped his shoulder. Thank you for giving me my life. The press conference continued. Questions flew. James answered some. Charles answered others. Emily stood strong beside her father as he told the story. The real story. The one he'd carried alone for so long. He spoke about the shot. The man's face. The guilt. The nightmares. The inability to explain to his wife why he was broken. Sarah Harrington, James said, his voice breaking on her name, was a casualty of that day too. She lived with a husband who couldn't tell her the truth, who kept secrets that ate him alive. She deserved better, and I will spend whatever time I have left honoring her memory and telling her story. A reporter called out, Do you regret it? Saving the king at such a cost? James was quiet for a long moment. The world held its breath. No, he said finally. I don't regret saving a life. I regret the silence. I regret what it cost my family. But the act itself, standing between a bullet and another human being, no, I'd do it again. He looked at Charles. But I hope no one else ever has to carry that weight alone. Later, after the cameras were gone and the reporters dispersed, they sat together in a quiet room. Just the 3 of them. King and guard and daughter. What will you do now? Charles asked. James looked at his hands, the hands that saved a life. Took a life, held his daughter. Failed to hold his wife, he said simply. If I can, you will, Emily said firmly. We'll do it together. Charles nodded. You'll have every resource. Every support. Whatever you need, and after, James asked. After the therapy and the healing and the rest? After you live, Charles said. Really live. For the first time in 30 years, you live for yourself, for your daughter, for the wife who deserved better. James's eyes filled again. But this time, it wasn't just pain. It was something else, something lighter. Hope, maybe, or the possibility of peace. I don't know how, he admitted. I've been a soldier so long. I've carried this so long. I don't know who I am without it. And we'll figure it out together, Emily said. One day at a time. Charles stood to leave, giving them space. But James stopped him. Your Majesty, Charles, wait. Charles turned. That night, when I stepped in front of you, I didn't think. I just acted. But if I'd known what it would cost, if I'd known about Sarah, about the pain, about everything, he paused, searching for the right words, I'd still do it. Because that's what we do. We protect, even when it costs us everything. That's what makes us human. Charles felt something break and mend inside his chest. Then let me protect you now. Let me give you back what was taken. Time, peace, truth. James nodded slowly. I can live with that. They shook hands. King and guard. Two men bound by a moment 30 years ago. By a bullet. By silence. By the cost of duty and the price of secrets. But also by something. It's now understanding, recognition, and the possibility that broken things could be mended. That truth, no matter how late, still mattered. That night, James Harrington slept without nightmares for the first time in 30 years. And when he awoke, his daughter was there. The medal was on his nightstand. And somewhere in the palace, a king was drafting new policies. No more secrets that destroy. No more silence that kills. No more heroes who have to suffer alone. The rain had stopped. The sun was rising. And for the first time in 3 decades, James Harrington felt like he could breathe.